Community Secretary Michael Gove is updating the government's definition of extremism to tackle the threats posed by Islamists and, we're told, the far right. But critics have raised concerns about the potential impact on free speech. Joining me now to discuss this is Alan Mendoza. He's founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. It's been dealing with this issue for some years now. Alan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Julia.
I'm just going to read out the definition again, the new definition for people who are just tuning in, because I think it's important that we actually know what people are saying, because basically this is about extremism as the promotion or advancement of an ideology based on violence, hatred or intolerance. OK, fair enough. That aims to, number one, I believe this is already in existence, aims to negate or destroy the fundamental rights and freedoms of others, or two, undermine, overturn or replace the UK's system of liberal parliamentary democracy and democratic rights, or three, and this is the crucial new bit, intentionally create a permissive environment for others to achieve the results in one or two. Now, what do you make of this? What will this achieve?
Well, I'm worried that it's going to fall between two stools, to be quite honest. The first is because there are so many sub-clauses and so many terms that will require interpretation, it means that you are at risk of perhaps not banning what you're looking to ban and instead catching unintended victims, as it were, in a ban, because the interpretation part means that a third party is going to have to come along and go, oh, well, this is what it means to be a permissive climate, or this is what it means to talk about removing rights. And then again, X group might escape from that, Y group might end up in it. That's the first problem. The second problem is, because it's a problem inherently of interpretation, what happens if there's a change of government or a change of direction of the country, and the people doing the interpretation change and decide to interpret it differently? Well, it would seem that you might have a lot of unintended consequences there, because, again, a lot of people who this government wouldn't intend to get caught up in extremism definition might be caught up as extremists going further down the line.
Yeah, indeed. I've got to be honest with you, I'm not even worried about the next government. I'm worried about this government. As I said a bit earlier, they sent my information to a counter-terrorism unit in the United States during lockdown because apparently I was such a threat just for being a journalist questioning government policy, which I thought was kind of my job as a journalist, and it was also the job of lots of MPs as well, who were also, and scientists who were also questioning things. I don't trust this government one bit any more than I would trust the next government to protect my individual rights. But yeah, there is a concern about what is an extremist and an ideology based on violence, hatred and intolerance. Well, I mean, I'll tell you what, I know that trans ideology is definitely based on hatred and intolerance because it doesn't allow women to, understand what women are or protects children. I think that's an unpleasant ideology. I'm not keen on Just Stop Oil and other climate activists who think that, quite falsely, that the threat to the planet is so great it justifies pretty much anything at all. Do I want these people branded as extremists? I'm not entirely sure that I do. I don't want them getting government money, as Stonewall does continually, and from many public bodies that we fund. But this is the thing. But that's my personal view. Were I the person making the decision, that'd be fine, but I won't be the person making the decision. So, as you say, interpretation, who does the interpreting is the issue. And isn't that the problem with anything like this? That these things need to be spelled out really clearly, and it needs to be stuff that is either criminal or not criminal. And if it ain't criminal, it's no business of the government's.
Well, I can see why the government would want to maybe declare why public money and why public platforms shouldn't go to certain people. I think that's fair enough for government to say. But I would agree on the point about the interpretation side. The more you leave to interpretation in any definition, the more likely it is either to be abused or misused or misapplied or, frankly, misinterpreted from the idea of what the original interpreter wanted it to be. And it would have been much simpler, I think, to leave it at fairly hard issues. For example, hatred and intolerance. Well, your idea of that might differ from mine, might differ from a third person's, might differ from a fourth person's. And they're very subjective things. Violence, however, is very hard and clear. We understand, certainly what that means. Undermining British liberal democracy, or rather challenging the institutions of that, that's obvious. We can see that and we understand that. Talking about removing rights...
I don't even think we can that one, actually. I mean...
Oh, I think we can.
How?
I think if you have an ideology to replace liberal democracy with a fascist rule or a caliphate, I think that's pretty obvious, Julia, that is not compatible with British liberal democracy. I think on that point it is. Okay. On rights, though, I've got a concern. What about the government legislating to remove the right of people to smoke, for example?
Yeah.
Isn't that the removal of a right? Isn't that therefore an extremist thing? I'm puzzled about that one. I'm also puzzled about the creating a permissive atmosphere, because once again, that is a very subjective thing. Again, one person saying something might be regarded by one person as a permissive attitude, but not a second one. So there's too much interpretation here, I fear.
And again, we even get into the issue. I know Michael Gove was asked about this in various interviews this morning about people on the streets and pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Number of the organisers of those demonstrations have very close links to Hamas, a proscribed terrorist organisation. People routinely chanting at those demonstrations, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which is a slogan from Hamas and means the annihilation of Israel and brackets the Jewish people, because that's what it actually means. I mean, let's be honest about it. But no, he doesn't think that that would be something that would, come, an action that would come under this issue. And certainly the police have seemed to have decided that that is an acceptable thing for not only the people to be chanting, but also to be, put up and lights on the outside Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament as well. But many of us would say that is an unacceptable statement for people to be chanting on the streets of our country.
Well, again, this shows why it's quite important to say what you mean to ban, rather than allowing it to be defined and then people having to ask a million questions to get there. Parts of Germany have banned the phrase "river from the sea." The government said it's banned, and that's that. Austria has banned it. There are other people thinking of a ban on that line. So it's clearly possible to ban that expression. It's clearly possible to say, for example, that we regard Islamism or the fascist far right as being, kind of ideologies that are extremist. That's perfectly possible to say and to do. But what we haven't done that in that definition, and that concerns me. What we've done is taken a definition which is going to require more people to interpret it, and we are then going to run the risk that we will end up with weird anomalies because they can't agree on what to interpret, and it may well end up that this government bans, or rather, labels only a very few groups as extremist, and a future government who's changed the criteria for what, for example, rights and values are and things like that, will end up banning a lot more. And again, that cannot be a very sensible position to be in.
No, indeed. Although, of course, Labour could just bring this in themselves anyway, even if this wasn't brought in. A lot of people are getting in touch on social media and texting with us this morning, basically saying, but this is just more talk, it's more words, it's not action. We've already got plenty of laws in place to tackle extremism. We just don't enact a lot of those laws. We don't actually see the arrests of people who are breaking the law very blatantly. We don't see people being suitably punished for that. So we haven't got that deterrent. So more talk, like Rishi Sunak's speech outside Downing Street the other week, it doesn't make any difference. You can put people on lists, you can talk about this stuff and wag your finger as much as you want. If you're not actually doing anything about it, it counts for nothing.
Well, I think this will make a difference in the field of government, in the field of public money, the sort of institutions of the state
but
working
only government money. Every quango and local council can carry on funding anyone they want.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how far it goes in terms of where the criteria are for what is defined as public sector or people not engaging. For example, the NHS will not be this, and it's amazing to think that they are at the moment. They are. Yeah. So there will be some action. However, what you raise is important. This is clearly not, and it wasn't intended to be, a legal definition in the sense of increasing criminal burdens on that sort of way. So we do have a problem here. It's not going to help resolve the problem that many people in this country feel, that the police are standing by and allowing extremism to flourish under their noses. It doesn't appear to do much for, sort of abuse on social media or such like as well. So we're not seeing at the hard end the action. It's a good start, in the sense of government taking action to take the most obvious steps to remove extremism from the public purse, as it were. But beyond that, we have a big fight to go, and this isn't necessarily going to help. And in some cases, it may hurt. For example, if there is a group that is not, or a phrase, or whatever, that is not then defined as extremist by the government, there is an argument that those groups will say, well, even the government doesn't define us as an extremist. How can you call us extremists going forward? So because it's a halfway house, it's very awkward.
And can I ask you just in terms of whether or not Michael Gove, and we don't know whether he will or not, is actually going to name some of the groups. He'll have parliamentary privilege to do that and say they're extremist groups. Muslim Council of Britain, Cage International, two groups that the government has basically cut all ties with, say that they are concerned they might bring a legal challenge to that. Would those be organisations that you would have, should we say, concerns about?
Yeah, what he said this morning is quite interesting. I don't think we're going to see a list because he was asked explicitly, will you be naming groups? And he said, it's not for me to do that. I have to look at all the evidence. And then once the evidence is passed, etc., then I can make a judgment on that basis. So I don't think we will see a group unless the evidence has appeared in the last 2 hours suddenly before him in that way. But yes, certainly there are groups in this country who, in my view, do undermine the liberal democratic institutions of the state and do, at the very least, incite to violence. And the big question is whether they will be included on any such list. And if they're not included, like I said, the danger is that it gives them carte blanche to claim we're not extremists because the government haven't said so. But of course, because the government's applying such, kind of curious different bits and pieces of this definition to it, it'll be unclear whether that's the correct stance to take. And once again, it comes down to the more complicated you make a definition, the more subject to interpretation it is, and the more dangerous it is.
We're going to get to more difficult. Just finally, I just want to briefly bring you some breaking news about terror arrests in the last year. 42 children, so those under the age of 18, were arrested for terrorist-related activities last year. It's the highest on record. The new figures reveal that the number of suspected terrorist teams increased by 31% compared with 2022. New data is showing that 219 people of all ages were arrested for terror-related activities last year. It's up 1/3 on the previous year. Islamist extremists accounted for 65%, so that's 2/3 of the people in custody, while just over a quarter were extreme right-wing, 9% had other ideologies. Alan Mendoza, what do you make of that news?
Well, I make of that once again it has been confirmed that radical Islam poses the greatest threat to this country through extremism and terrorism. And anyone who's denying that, and people have been going out for the last few days claiming that there is, some kind of targeting. There's no targeting. This is about attacking an ideology, an extreme end of Islam that needs to be tackled because it poses a threat to the life and safety of people in this country. And until we get that message through to the authorities and beyond, we are at risk.